Welcome to episode 2 of Ask GBN. This is a new program that we're doing. It is a spin-off from Truth on Wheels, where Glenn and I were doing questions and answers together, and it's been well received, and we decided to keep it going. So welcome back, Glenn.
Love to do it. It's just a pleasure to get to do it with you.
You know, this is interesting to me because years ago, maybe 30 years ago, when I was starting to preach, you were the first one who told me that you did questions and answers. And I thought, I love that. And I started doing questions and answers once a month where I was preaching. And I called you and said, can I run over some of these questions? And we started doing that together on a monthly basis for years. We did that. So I feel privileged 30 years later. We ought to call this Ask Glenn because
we were off camera a while ago and we were talking about this, and it's just a pleasure to do it. And anytime you're around people who love the Bible, as we do, just to get to talk about Scripture. Do you think that when we're in heaven, we'll get to talk about the Bible? I would love to think that we would.
Wow, the insight we'll have then.
I need to talk to Paul a little while before that conversation and get some answers that the Bible's not written to satisfy our curiosities. But what we do in this program is to take questions and apply, and our job is to work and say, this Scripture applies to that question.
Yeah.
And application.
Yeah. That's right. All right. Well, we've got some great questions here. Number one, is there anything unscriptural about a woman baptizing someone? And then the person that asked it adds, I know all the examples in the Bible are men doing the baptizing.
Don, you and I have talked earlier about what I think is a really critical point, and that is that, and let me just review it, is that the validity of a person's baptism does not hinge on the righteousness of the person doing the baptizing.
Sure.
And a simple illustration helps us to see that. Let's just say that a man who is a preacher, a gospel preacher, every week people respect and love him, but the truth is that he's living in some awful sin and he's lost.
Yeah.
And nobody knows it except the Lord. He's lost.
Yeah.
And he baptizes during that lengthy period of time. Let's just say he baptizes 150 people. Are their baptisms illegitimate and invalid because he was wicked? Yeah. But you could even take it a step further. And what if 20 of those people who he baptized became preachers and they baptized a lot of people? Are those people's baptism invalid? So, of course, we get it. We get it. The fact is that my baptism isn't about that person's righteousness and who baptizes me. It could even be someone who is a preacher for a false religion, but if he baptizes me scripturally, then I'm in Christ.
Yeah.
All right. It's got to be that way. It has to be that way.
Sure.
Logically.
Before you go on, it triggered a thought. I saw an article on Fox News about the Catholic Church and a priest, something he had done and I can't remember the guy's name, but folks could Google it and find this. They said every baptism that he had performed for the last 20 years was invalid. And they went on to say
By the way, they were.
They were, because you can't, there's no salvation in the Catholic Church, right? But they said, and I got to thinking, they went on to say that baptism was necessary for salvation, but all of the baptisms he'd done for 20 years were invalid. I think in 20 years, some of those people had died. And so it just shows the absurdity.
And you think about, just to stretch the illustration, you think about the problem that the Catholic Church has had with ungodliness in the priesthood that's been on a massive scale.
That's right.
And that doesn't mean everybody was doing that, but a massive scale. And I don't know, that's just an amazing
I think
thought.
the priest's name was Arango, if anybody wanted to Google it and see. But of course, Catholic baptism is not a scriptural baptism anyway. That was just to illustrate the point. But anyway,
so
I interrupted
back to the question. No, that's great. Back to the question. So what about a woman doing the baptizing? And sometimes we're being asked this question, and I think it's really important to think it through. If it's the case that my baptism's validity is not contingent upon the righteousness of the one doing the baptizing, is it contingent upon the gender of the one doing the baptizing? And the counterpoint would be, but every time we see baptisms in the New Testament, it's always by a man. And so we've got to figure out what is a reasonable balance between those two. And what would you say to that?
I would say this: if you see a congregation where someone comes forward to be baptized, the person who is doing this and conducting this is obviously in a leadership position. And so it's natural the man should be doing this, because the leadership in the church has been placed in the hands of men, not women, despite what's going on in the world around us. Now, on the other hand, I've known of at least two congregations over the years that were all women. And so if a woman came forward and wanted to be baptized, and a woman did that baptism, then that doesn't invalidate that in any way. Now, if you had a congregation where you had men and women, and someone came forward and the woman was going to do the baptizing, I'd have a problem with that, because it would appear that she's moved into a leadership position, and I'd be very troubled by that. And I think it comes down to a principle of biblical leadership. But in another situation, like I said, a congregation of women, a woman does the baptizing, then that's not unscriptural because of female. There's nothing in the Bible that says only a man can baptize someone.
So it could be an error in judgment, or perhaps even something wrong, for a woman to take a leadership role in this case, and yet the baptism still be valid.
Sure. Think about something like this. What if a woman was teaching her non-Christian husband in the house? They're in a place where there are no members of the church, and they decide that she's going to baptize him in their bathtub or in their swimming pool. Would people come along later and say, oh, your baptism was not valid under those circumstances?
Great question, and I doubt it. Where we're hearing, I think, most about it around our circles, I guess, is where you have ladies' days, perhaps in a remote place, and there's just not a man there. Yeah. And maybe otherwise they would have sought out a man to come and do the baptizing. So what I think about this is my judgment. That's what I want to phrase that, is that as a general rule, it's a right thing to invite a man to come and do that.
Yeah.
It emphasizes male leadership.
Yeah.
It also shows regard for even this matter in the scripture about that it was always men who did it.
Yeah.
However, I could not find it in my conscience to require, if you please, rebaptism for a person who was baptized by a woman.
I think the principle in the Bible would be, if there are men present, men should do the baptizing.
Yes.
But there are unique circumstances, like we've cited, where a woman could do it.
That's exactly what I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Here is the next question. And this one was submitted to me personally. I don't remember if it's a GBN email or personal email, but the person said, at our congregation, a Church of Christ, we give really good singers a microphone that amplifies their voice in the auditorium system. Is this an aid or an addition? And I think the person who asked it, they didn't like the fact that their congregation was starting to do this. Mic the best singers, and they were told, what's just an aid, just like any other aid. And I think they were saying that it was an addition, but they were being told by leadership, no, it's just an aid. So they were asking the question.
Won't you spend a minute, Don, talking about, we may have viewers who aren't really clear about what the aid addition thing is.
Yeah, that's a good thought. The reason a person might ask whether something is an aid or an addition would be this. If God gives us a command, sometimes there are things required to carry out that command. For instance, God gives us the command to assemble. Well, to assemble mandates a place. You have to have a place. It mandates a time, but he hasn't specified the time. He hasn't specified. So we have authority to build a building. That's an aid to carry out that command. If you're going to follow the commandment of Colossians 3:16 and Ephesians 5:18 to sing, well, you have to have songs. That's required. That means you have to have a tune. So an aid to doing that would be a sheet of music. An aid to doing that would be someone to lead so that we can all start and finish at the same time.
Decently and in order.
But when we've gotten done, we've got a sheet of music and a man leads. All we've done is follow that command. Now, an addition to that would be someone playing the piano.
Right.
That's not an aid. That's a second type of music. And so the person is asking this, when a person mics or a congregation mics the best singers, is that an aid to help us carry out the command of singing, or is this an addition to what God has asked for?
And isn't it possible that something could be an aid and yet be wrong because it's also an addition?
That's a good thought.
I think playing the piano, I think people could legitimately argue that this is helping us stay on the tune and keep it rolling and all that. And yet it's wrong to use it because it's also an addition, like you pointed out.
What would your answer to this be before I offer my thoughts?
I think that there are two issues that need to be raised. And one is, I'll raise one, and then if you don't want to do the other one, one would be the question of women. I don't think it's wrong to, amplification would fall into the category of an aid. So oftentimes we're in auditoriums and the crowd is so large that if you didn't have amplification, people couldn't hear.
Sure.
And so we're preaching the gospel, and whatever we're doing, the voice is amplified, and that way the church can hear it and be edified. So it's not wrong to use microphones, but what if we mic our best singers, and some of them are women? Now, 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 12 would prohibit women from leading in that worship. They cannot do that without doing something that's sinful. And you say, well, but they're not at the front. Well, I would argue that leadership can be done and emphasized in more than one way. And one would be to put them in the front, but another would be to raise their voices above others.
Yeah.
And now they're leading, and that's just wrong.
Yeah. And I would agree. Some congregations have what they call praise teams. They'll take 2 men and 2 women and put them up front, and you basically have a sense of a choir, a group that's leading. You've got 2 women who are leading in the singing, and it's absolutely not scriptural. This would be the same thing. You've just mic'd them and had them sit in the auditorium.
It's the same thing.
And so it would be the same, and I agree with everything you're saying there. But a second concern I had about this is if you give microphones to certain people, it is not about making our singing more pleasing to God. It becomes about making our singing more pleasing to us.
Right.
And it gets to the point that it could almost fall into the category of entertainment.
And in some churches, that's exactly what has happened.
Yeah.
Is that as you start out with something like miking your most talented singers, and then you bring them forward. And when we get in the mindset where this is about us and what pleases us, listen, we've done something really, really bad.
That's right.
About worship. We've missed the core, which is this is about God.
That's
and what
right.
does God want?
That's right. And the focus of putting it on the best singers is not about God. It's about what pleases us, what people like, what will draw people. God doesn't care whether I've got a good voice or not.
And once we mess up this, and what's happened historically now over the last few years is that we start, and I know it's not true in every church, but you start emphasizing pleasing the people with the mics and the best singers, and then you bring them up on the stage and you please everybody more, and then you give them instruments.
Yeah.
And the talented, skilled guitar players and the pianists and all of that, the keyboardist, the drummer, listen, you can please people even more.
That's
and
true.
If worship is about pleasing people, then you got it, but that's never been pleasing to God.
That's right. All right, here's the next question. This one actually had a video that came with it. We're not going to show the video, but the question was, is there ever a time when a Christian can be justified using foul language, it says cussing, for the sake of reaching a worldly or ungodly person or to diffuse a situation? And it had a video clip of a preacher, and he was saying that it's okay. If you're dealing with worldly, ungodly people, he said there's a counseling technique called mirroring. and you mirror that person and they begin to cuss and carry on, and you do it back. You give it back to them. And the counseling world says that this is a good thing, and he does that and he practices that. And this person sent in this question saying, what about that?
My objective, it's wrong. It's just wrong. And my objective in teaching somebody the gospel is to not for me to mirror them. Now, I know that Paul became all things to all men, that he might save some. And the idea was that in things that weren't sinful, he could fit in, and that would have, perhaps that has something to do with the clothing that we wear when we go around people, or some things that are just matters of indifference, but it never was about sin. And my objective in teaching somebody the gospel is not for me to mirror their sinful activity, but to have them mirror Christ. That's our objective, have them mirror Christ. And the very idea that we would do something sinful to try to appeal to an unbeliever is cattywampus.
Yeah, it's my thoughts were, this is absolutely ridiculous. The thought that a preacher would say something like that is shocking.
How far would you go?
When Jesus was on the cross and the people were cursing him, did he curse them back? If this theory is right, and Romans 12, be not conformed to the world. What's that mean? Don't mirror the world, but be transformed. It says exactly the opposite of this.
I had a neighbor one time who was a real sweet lady. We lived in Tennessee, and she, in Pulaski, Tennessee, and she wasn't a Christian, but I met her for the first time. We moved in and met her neighbor, and she said, I said, now what do y'all do for a living? And she said, well, I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you. I said, well, you shouldn't do it if you're embarrassed. I teased her, and she said, well, we have a tavern. And she said, but it's a bar is what it was. And she said, but, and she was a very sweet lady, very sweet, but she said, it's a bar, but she said, we often talk to people about Jesus in the bar. Well, I think that's the same thing.
Sure.
And it is not the path that you want to go down in trying to help people come to Christ.
I would say this might be a recommended counseling tactic, but it's not biblical.
It's unbiblical. So here's Ephesians 4:29. Let no corrupt language, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Or Colossians 3:8, I put this one down, but now you yourselves are to put off all these, put them off, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. So there's the prohibition.
That's right.
And you can't imagine Paul thinking, but it would be okay to do it if you're trying to influence somebody for Christ.
Sure. One more thought. Much of the counseling that takes place in the world and counseling techniques are not in line with the Bible.
Yeah, that's sometimes very frightening.
Yeah,
but true.
All right. When one goes on vacation, should he leave his contribution at home, or should he give it at the congregation where he attends while he's out of town?
I really appreciate this question, because whoever wrote it implied that we should give our contribution even though we're going on a vacation.
Yeah.
And we could probably use that extra money for the vacation, right?
That's a good point.
We keep it ourselves.
Yeah.
How would you respond to this, Don?
I think a person should leave his contribution at home. They worship under the oversight of the elders at that particular congregation. Hopefully they're taking an active part in the programs and the efforts of that church. That would include their money. The budget of that congregation is based on the giving of the members of that congregation. And I think the problem is sometimes people start thinking, well, I'm not worshiping. That's an aspect of worship. And if I go somewhere else and I don't give, then I'm not worshiping. But the act of giving is not the act of putting your check in the plate. You purpose ahead of time, and if you leave it at home, you've still engaged in giving. And you might say, well, I didn't put the check in the plate. But I would argue if you had to get up and go to the bathroom and your wife put your check in the plate, you still engaged in that act of worship. It's not the magical moment. And if it really bothers your conscience, you could give some additional money at the place where you were worshiping, but your home congregation is dependent on that. That's where you have engaged yourself to participate in the work of that local church.
I think you're exactly right. And in my life now, I travel a lot. And so what I did about, and this is personal, but what I did was to have automatic debits made for my contribution each Sunday.
Yeah.
Because initially when I took this work with GBN, which I just really enjoyed doing, but I'm traveling a lot. When I first started it, I had to remember about my contribution
Yeah.
often, getting it in early. Because, by the way, I think the answer to the question too is that you could die, on vacation, and you don't want to die owing God money, right?
Yeah.
You'd want to be ahead on that, I think. And I know that I'm just being silly, but I like what you said. We should leave it with the elders, with the church. Those elders are depending on those funds. You got missionaries out there. And I don't know that the missionaries are probably going to starve because they don't have your contribution this Sunday, but the principle is still there, and that's where my heart is. And I want to make sure that my funds are part of what the work of the church is that week, and that my vacation doesn't deter from any of that.
And I'm afraid that what happens sometimes is people go on vacation and they don't give it all, and when they get home, they don't make it up, and they just keep it. And it makes me think about this. Giving is something that's not done on the spur of the moment. Our giving involves purposing in our heart.
Yes.
It involves forethought. And so if I've purposed in my heart that I'm going to give a certain amount to the Lord, and I'm going to give as I've prospered, but then something happens and I don't happen to be there and I just keep it, I've robbed God.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Malachi 3 and verse 8, where the Lord asked the question to his people, will a man rob God? And he says, yet you've robbed me in tithes and offerings. So he said his people in the Old Testament actually robbed him by not giving the things they had prospered.
I would like to point out, I think that's exactly right. I'd like to point out that what we're teaching right now isn't to benefit us in any way, because we got people watching who are members of the Lord's church and whatever for a long different span of churches of Christ, and we're encouraging everybody to do this in their home congregation because it's right. So I would summarize this by saying that what we need to do is to be intentional in our giving and not willy-nilly.
Right.
Be intentional about it, and that's implied in purposing in your heart.
Right. Yeah. All right. If a young couple got married, said their vows to God, but realized shortly afterward that they made a big mistake and decided to annul it, but they never consummated their marriage, does God still recognize that marriage, and is it considered an unscriptural divorce?
Yeah. And I think we've had some discussion about this before. At what point are you married? That's really the critical question.
Yeah.
And I know that answer changes with some cultures. So when Abraham sent Eliezer to get a bride for Isaac, and she comes back, Isaac's never met her, and the Bible says that she goes down to his mother's tent where he is, but that was recognized as marriage.
Right.
It wasn't recognized as fornication. It was marriage.
Yeah.
And no question about that in anybody's mind. So whatever the culture requires, the line of demarcation between being single and being married, when you cross that line, and in America, of course, there's got to be some sort of a ceremony, and it may just be the justice of the peace or signing a paper or whatever is involved. There's a line between people who are married who are not married. But in this question, that's what they did. Now, I thought about this, and I think I'm going to complicate the question in just a second, if you don't mind, Don, but this implies that they're old enough to sign the paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they're 18,
Yeah.
whatever that is, and that is young, but it's old enough that they can get married. I would argue that what we mean by consummation is not a biblical concept.
Yeah.
You're married when you're declared married, and I would put this parenthetical note because I just think it's right. Otherwise, I want to be really discreet. What that young bride and young husband do leading up to the actual act of marriage would be lasciviousness.
Yeah. Yeah, this idea of annulment and whether the wedding has been consummated. What they mean, of course, is have they had sexual relations?
Right.
And they'll say, well, if you haven't had sexual relations yet, you're not really married. Well, that's not in the Bible.
That's just not true.
Yeah. So this is a
The fact is that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the fact is they have the right to have sex.
Yeah.
It's because they're already married.
That's right. And so this idea of annulment and consummation is a made-up concept. I've been asked this a lot of times over the years, and I actually know of this question, but I know of it on at least 2 occasions where it was real, where people said, well, we were very, very young, and we decided very quickly afterwards that it was a mistake and we divorced, and so they don't want to count it. But it did count. If they got married, they were married.
This past week, and I'm going to complicate this, not really a complication, but we can cut it out later if you don't want to keep this. But I came back from India and talked to a brother who frequents trips to India to teach. And again, they have arranged marriages there. And which is, it's so very interesting. I won't go on about that. But he said he knew a case where parents negotiated with other parents. One side had a grown son. I guess he was in his 20s. But the girl, the bride, was 10 years old. 10 years old.
Wow.
And they married him. And the question was, like this question, were they really married? And I said, they're not married because marriage implies consent. And that girl didn't consent to that. She's a little girl. She's a child. And she didn't consent. That was something that I would say that it was rape. I would say that what you have is kidnapping and rape. Yeah. Later on, because the question went on to say that she grew into an adult and she was miserable. She never consented to that, and she put her husband away and she married someone else. And so I could be wrong about my judgment about that, and that's not exactly the question, but my heart went out to that circumstance. But what we're talking about is where 2 individuals consent to be married and they follow through with what is a cultural or societal line of demarcation between single and married. And the answer is they're married before they have sex.
That's right. That's right. I totally agree with that. I think that is biblical. All right, we're going to stop. We're trying to keep these around 30 minutes. So thank you for joining us for this episode of Ask GBN. And if you've got questions that you would like us to answer on the air, please send those to us at info@gbntv.org.